boys and girls, how are you guys doing this afternoon? I hope you're having a lovely fall afternoon. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, by the way. If you guys have kept up with my TikTok, you know that recently I made this tiny little plant, this tiny little holder for this little succulent that I bought at a Lowe's home goods store, but it's fine. I think it's a super nice little pot, just a little piece of white oak, I think, white or red oak, just a simple little pot. It's already got an entire huge crack right down the back of it, top to bottom. I knew that was going to happen. It's a piece of wood that gets full of water every day. It's what's to be expected. That's not the issue. The issue is I don't have an interesting way to water that little plant boy there. That's the most important part. You can't have a boring watering system in an interesting pot. I could just take water in a water bottle and pour it in there every day, but that would make me a member of the lower class, seeing as the true class divide in this country is the way in which you water your succulents, and we are upper class people in this neighborhood. That's what I like. That's what I like to say, living in redneck crack country. But anyway, the plan for the day is to make a little watering can, a little can that holds water, make it interesting, make it on theme with that pot. I had an idea of what I wanted to do when I started making this little watering can, started making this video. That idea quickly went out the window due to a number of things, but you will see all that in just a second when we get down to the shop. So let's get a-going! So when I started this project off, my plan was to make a kind of teapot looking watering can because I really like the style of some of those smaller old teapots. I like how dainty and neat they look. I thought it looked really cool, like kind of go with the succulent vibe and everything. But I quickly realized I could not do that, seeing as I did not have a butane torch with butane in it, so I could not solder the copper together. But that was not going to stop me from finishing this project in one afternoon, as for some reason I was extremely determined to do so. At this point I had a different idea in my head, but I wasn't working with a whole lot of direction. I just knew the style I wanted to go with and I was working towards that. I started off by taking a scrap piece of copper pipe I had laying around. I measured it out to how big I wanted the teapot to be, and I used a handsaw to split right down the middle so I could flatten it out and use it as copper sheet for the pot. And after I got split all the way down the middle, I took it over to the anvil and used the horn of the anvil to spread it out so I could flatten it down more, but it was still pretty tight and pretty tough, so I decided to anneal it real quick, went over to the forge, and I did not have a lighter, my butane torch, or anything that made fire in the entire shop at that point in time, so I made a very creative method of setting a little piece of paper towel on fire and used that to get the forge lit up. For those that don't know, to soften copper up, all you need to do is get it really hot and then cool it down really fast. So I just threw it in there for a little while, and I stuck it in the bucket of water, and we were all good to go. I took it over to the anvil. I used the horn to really start spreading it out a little bit more, and then I just took it over to the face and flattened it out all the way into the sheet that I was ready to use. After it was all flat, I simply used a little can of stain that I had laying around to kind of form it into this semicircle to see how it would look and if I really liked how the vibe was going with it. I was pretty pleased with how it looked at the time, so I flattened it all the way back out and then began to peen that peened hammer look into it. I just took a ball peen hammer and smacked it so many times until the entire thing was covered with that nice ball peen finish. Hammered look looked spectacular if you ask me. And after that, all that was really left to do was take it over to the belt sander and get it all squared up so it'd be nice and easy to put in whatever I ended up doing with it, because I still wasn't sure at this point, and that's when we get to the next step in this plan. Well, to call it a plan would be a little bit of a stretch, thing as I didn't really know exactly what I was doing, but I grabbed this piece of wood that was still attached to the base from the actual making of the pot that the little succulent is in right now, and I began to smooth that out and round it out one more time just to make sure it was all done and finished. And my second original plan was to use that as the other half of the teapot and kind of have one semicircle of wood and one of copper and kind of insert that into it and kind of have the wood still as the base, but it didn't really work out that way, which was completely fine with me at this point. The entire design was evolving as I went, and the reason that didn't really work out is because as I was walking over to grab something else, I found this piece of wood literally on the floor. It was a piece of scrap wood from an old pallet that I had made a tray out of, and for some reason I decided this would work so much better, so I grabbed that piece of wood and started working on it as the back plate for this kind of semicircle of copper that I had going on. and I got a measurement of how big the pieces I wanted would be, and I just went over, stuck them in the vise, cut those two out. I cut the first one with the same handsaw I used to cut the piece of copper with. I don't know why I did this, honestly, have absolutely no clue, because I very quickly decided I was going to cut the second one with the little electric saw that was already on the table right beside me while I was using the handsaw to cut the entire other one, but that is no problem, no point against the point. Getting a little bit back on track, what I was doing with these is I was planning on using one as the base and one as the back plate that the copper would slip into. So to get this to work, what I did was just took that little handsaw and I cut some angled slits directly into the face of that piece of wood. That way I could slip the copper sheet that I had already formed into a semicircle just right in there. And I just cut that out with the handsaw. And now we had to figure out what I was going to use as the spout. As I am a little teapot, short and stout, a teapot requires a spout. Even though this is a watering can, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I went through a few different ideas in my head of what I was going to do for the spout of it. I had something in mind to start with, but since I completely redesigned the teapot as a whole, I also kind of changed the plan for what I was going to use as the spout. I had this super small piece of copper tubing that was left over from a wood gasifier that I had made one time, and I just kind of took it over to the anvil, and I didn't really want it to just be a tube. I didn't really go with the theme of the rest of the teapot, so I just used a hammer and I squared the whole thing out. I was very, very anxious during this because I didn't want to mess up the actual hole throughout the tube to keep water from flowing through it. So that's why I use my pecker. That is what a tiny hammer is called. You can Google it. It's a pecker. I get to call it that. And after I got the entire thing squared out, I just flipped that hammer around and used the ball peen side to add the same texturing that I had put on the rest of the watering can on the little spout here. I think it turned out pretty nice. I simply took that over to the bandsaw and cut it off to the length that I wanted it, and then kind of shaped it with my hands into kind of an S shape to go into the front of the watering can with. After this, I had the issue of actually getting it into the watering can, and I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do, but I started off by measuring out what the center of the semicircle would be. First, I tried rolling it across a piece of wood and then marking the center of that, but then I realized I couldn't really use that to mark the center of the semicircle, so I got an Atwood's receipt that I also found on the floor of the shop, where the majority of the materials for this project are starting to come from. And I just used that. I wrapped it around the can. I marked one side and the other side, folded it in half, marked the center, and then used that to mark right in the center of where the semicircle would be. I figured out the height at which I wanted the spout to come out of, and then I just drilled a hole right in there. But the issue was, I had decided I wanted this to be a square tube for some reason for the spout, so that I have to have a square hole. And you cannot drill a square hole with a round drill bit. Or so I've been told. So to solve this issue, I went over to the forge, I grabbed a rusty old nail, not off the floor this time, on a shelf, very close to the floor, and I threw it in the forge, and I forged it out just to be a little square punch that I could use just to make a similar shaped hole to the tubing that I had made before. I knew it wouldn't be perfect because I really hadn't got the tubing to a perfect square, and it'd be very difficult to make this a perfect punch for it, but I took that over. I put the actual semicircle of copper on a piece of scrap wood that I also got from a pallet after I drilled a hole in it so the punch wouldn't go in the wood, and I just punched that straight through the top where I drilled the hole, and that really helped to square off the hole a good bit, and I could do the rest with a set of hand files that I had later. But at this point, I had pretty much got all of the pieces ready to assemble, and then had to go put them together. I started off by attaching the two pieces of wood I had cut for the back and the base, just making a little L shape there. This could have easily been done with nails or screws or glue, but I just had a little air nail gun that I used just to tack it together real quick. And this is a quick reminder never to take shortcuts, because I almost shot one of those nails right into my finger right out of the back of the piece of wood that split right in twain when I tried to put a nail through it. But eventually I got them attached, and I moved up to the house to do the rest of the assembly because I had those little files at my work desk and not at my shop. Those little files are the things I used to take that already square hole on the front of the can and make it fit perfectly with the end of that little spout, so everything just slipped together all nice and neatly. Didn't take too long to get that hole figured out, and then from that point all that was left to do was take that can and slip it right into those slots I had already made on that piece of wood right there on the back. And I could already hear you saying, "Jack, not a single part of this thing is waterproof. How is this a watering can?" Well, that's where the most important step of this entire project comes in. coating the entire thing with epoxy. I ran down to Walmart and picked up the cheapest epoxy that money could buy and started off by squirting an entire tube of it out onto a paper plate and then mixing that up really quick, and seeing as the cheapest epoxy money can buy sets in 5 minutes, I was very frantically working to coat the interior of this thing with epoxy. But I did get it done, and now the entire can was waterproof and it was definitely set together. 2-for-1 deal right there. The epoxy held the whole thing together and it makes it waterproof. At this point, all that was left to do was to wait and then see if it worked properly. I waited a couple hours for everything to dry and set up and made sure nothing was still tacky on the inside of the can. I filled her up with water, and now it was time for my little plant to come into play. I took her over there and boom, worked like a dream. Couldn't have imagined it working so good. I was very excited with how this project turned out. I think it looks nice. It looks like a bookend and kind of a watering can. It looks like you took a watering can, cut it in half, and made it into a bookend, which I guess it means it's multi-purpose. This could also be a bookend if I wanted it to. This is a bookend now. Maybe? I don't know. All said and done, I think it looks all right. Thank you guys so very much for watching all the way through the end of the video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope this project could be an example of the fact that you don't always have to have a plan, you don't always have to know exactly what you're going to make when you go down to start a project. You just have to know you want to do something, and those speed bumps along the way aren't always they're gonna slow you down. They're gonna slow you down, but they aren't gonna stop you from getting to that final project. You don't need all those fancy tools. I didn't have half the stuff I was gonna use to make the original project, but I still made something that I think turned out quite nice. It's a little cute, dainty pot, and I think that's perfect. I think it's excellent. I think I love it quite a bit, and I hope you loved it and hope you loved the experience of me making it. And if you did so, please like the video, do the little subscribe thing down below, and I hope you will all have the most amazing day ever. My cat just sneezed. Goodbye.